The first time I saw her, she was nothing more than a shadow in the fading twilight, thin, weary, and worn down by hunger. Her ribs stretched against her dull, matted fur, and her green eyes, wide with desperation, flickered between fear and hope. I wasn't a cat person, but something about her stopped me cold. Without thinking, I set down a bowl of food. She devoured it in frantic, gulping bites, then vanished into the night. But the next morning, she returned. And she wasn't alone. Curled up on my doormat, pressed against her fragile body, were 4 tiny kittens. My heart pounded. What had I gotten myself into? I stood frozen in the doorway, the cool morning air forgotten against my skin. Willow, the name came to me unbidden, lifted her head, blinking at me with cautious familiarity. Her body curled protectively around the tiny, shivering bundles nestled against her, their fur still damp from the morning dew. They barely moved, just the softest wriggles and twitching paws, their eyes not yet open to the world. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't know anything about kittens, how to feed them, how to keep them safe. My instinct told me to call someone, anyone, but who? The nearest animal shelter was miles away, and I wasn't even sure they'd take them. Willow let out a quiet, raspy meow, drawing my gaze back to her. Was she asking for more food? For help? I stepped back into the house, grabbing the same plate from the night before, and filling it with whatever scraps I could find. Some shredded chicken from the fridge, a bit of tuna. The moment I set it down, she hunched over it, eating with desperate, deliberate bites, but always keeping one watchful eye on her kittens. I crouched down, hesitantly reaching out a hand, but she tensed. Not a warning, but uncertainty. She trusted me enough to bring her babies here, yet she wasn't sure how much further that trust could go. And the truth was, I wasn't sure either. The morning air carried a crisp stillness, but my thoughts churned with uncertainty. I sat on the porch, watching the fragile family that had taken up residence at my feet. Willow's thin body curled protectively around her kittens, her tail draped over them like a shield. They wriggled blindly, pressing against her warmth, their fur so impossibly soft it barely seemed real. The sight of them stirred something deep in my chest, something between awe and panic. I had no idea how to care for newborn kittens, let alone a stray mother who had chosen my doorstep as her refuge. I wasn't a cat person, had never planned on being one, but here they were, and walking away wasn't an option. Pulling out my phone, I hesitated before scrolling through my contacts, trying to think of someone who might know what to do. The nearest shelter was miles away, and the thought of dropping them off somewhere unfamiliar sat uneasily with me. After a moment, I settled on Mrs. Callahan, my elderly neighbor, who had lived in this town longer than I'd been alive and seemed to know everything that happened in it. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice warm but sharp with curiosity, as if she already knew I had something unusual to tell her. When I explained the situation, there was a pause, followed by a knowing chuckle. She told me Willow had been around for months, but had never let anyone get close. Her voice carried something I couldn't quite place, admiration, maybe even relief. "But she trusts you," she said simply. The weight of those words settled over me, and for the first time since I'd stepped outside that morning, I felt the shift of something bigger than just an unexpected responsibility. Before I could think of how to respond, Mrs. Callahan spoke again, her tone firm and reassuring. "Stay put, dear. I'm coming over." As I ended the call and glanced back at Willow, she met my gaze, her green eyes steady, unafraid. There was no mistaking it. She had made a choice. Whether I was ready or not, this was now my reality. Mrs. Callahan arrived within 15 minutes, her old sedan kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop in my driveway. She stepped out with the kind of steady purpose that came from years of knowing exactly what to do, her cardigan drawn tight against the morning chill. Without hesitation, she strode up the porch steps and knelt beside Willow, her movements slow but assured. The old woman's lined hands hovered just above the mother cat, giving her a chance to react, but Willow merely flicked her ears, acknowledging the presence without a hint of fear. "She's thinner than I thought," Mrs. Callahan murmured, tilting her head as she studied the cat. "And the kittens, good Lord, they can't be more than a day or 2 old." She glanced at me then, her expression shifting from calm observation to something more serious. "You know what this means, don't you?" I shook my head. "What?" she sighed, sitting back on her heels. She didn't just bring them to you because she trusts you. She brought them because she can't do this alone. She's exhausted, Daniel. If you hadn't fed her yesterday, she might not have had the strength to care for them at all. The weight of her words settled in my chest like a slow, creeping realization. I had thought I was simply providing food to a hungry stray, but it was more than that. I wasn't just a convenient stop for a desperate cat. I was her only hope. I exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of my neck as I let Mrs. Callahan's words sink in. Willow hadn't just chosen my porch because it was convenient. She had come to me because she had no other choice. The realization carried a weight I wasn't sure I was ready for. I had assumed she could handle her kittens on her own, that I was nothing more than an observer in this strange situation. But now it was clear. She was depending on me. Mrs. Callahan pushed herself up from the porch floor with a quiet grunt and dusted off her knees. "She's lucky she found you," she said, though there was something unreadable in her tone, something that made me feel like this wasn't just luck. But this isn't going to be easy. Those babies are fragile, and she's not in the best shape. If she's too weak to nurse them properly, you'll have to step in. I blinked at her. Step in how? Her lips pressed together in thought before she gave me a pointed look. Bottle feeding. Round the clock, every 2 to 3 hours. A wave of panic tightened my chest. You mean like I have to feed them? Personally? Well, they certainly won't be ordering takeout, she said dryly, then softened. You don't have to do this alone. We'll get what you need, and I'll help. But Daniel, if you're in, you're in. I glanced at Willow, her tired eyes watching me, waiting. Whatever choice I made, it had to be now. The weight of commitment pressed down on me, but before I could say anything, Mrs. Callahan was already moving. Come on, we need supplies, she said, heading back toward her car. Kitten formula, bottles, blankets, and a heating pad. You have a box or something to keep them in? I glanced at my porch, then back at her. A box? She sighed, shaking her head. You can't just leave them out here, Daniel. They're newborns. They can't regulate their body temperature yet, and with their mother as underfed as she is, she won't be able to keep them warm enough on her own. My stomach tightened as I took in the tiny, fragile bodies curled against Willow. The idea of bringing them inside felt overwhelming, but leaving them out here suddenly seemed worse. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling sharply. All right, I'll find something. Mrs. Callahan nodded approvingly. Good, I'll be back soon with what we need. As her car rumbled back down the road, before I could overthink it, I went inside, rummaging through my house until I found an old storage bin. Lining it with towels, I hesitated, then carefully lifted it onto the kitchen floor. Ready or not, they were coming inside. Willow hesitated at the threshold, her ears twitching as she eyed the open door. I crouched beside her, my hand hovering just inches from her back. Come on, girl, I murmured. It's warmer inside. She didn't flinch at my voice, but she didn't move either. Her body remained curled protectively around her kittens, her muscles tight with uncertainty. I had expected her to trust me completely after bringing her babies here, but now I realized trust wasn't something that flipped like a switch. She had taken a risk by coming to me, but stepping inside was another leap entirely. And maybe I wasn't ready for that either. What if I did something wrong? What if I got too attached? Swallowing my own hesitation, I reached down, gently scooping up the kittens first and placing them inside the storage bin in my kitchen. The moment they were gone, Willow's head snapped up. Her body tensed then. With a sharp breath, she sprang forward, trotting after them as if she had just realized how vulnerable they were without her. She slipped inside before I could even process it, rubbing her cheek against the edge of the bin as she checked on them. I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. She was in, and so was I. The house felt different with them inside, as if the quiet had taken on a new shape. The occasional rustling of tiny paws against the soft towels, the faint, breathy mews, and the slow, rhythmic sound of Willow's tongue as she cleaned each kitten. All of it settled into the background like a fragile heartbeat. It should have felt temporary, a problem to solve before returning to normal life. Yet there was an undeniable shift beneath the surface. The presence of these tiny creatures, helpless and wholly dependent, made my home feel less like an empty space and more like something occupied. That realization sat heavy in my chest, pressing against the logical part of my brain that insisted I wasn't keeping them. Before I could fully process it, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I sighed, pulling it out and glancing at the screen before answering. Mark, the last person I wanted to explain this to. "Hey," I said, already bracing for his reaction. "Hey man, you at work today?" His voice was casual, but I knew where this was going. I hesitated. "No, something came up." There was a short pause before his scoff came through the line. "Wait, this isn't about that cat, is it? You're not seriously getting involved in this mess, are you?" I rubbed a hand over my face, glancing toward the makeshift nest in my kitchen where Willow had curled herself around her kittens. Her body remained tense even in sleep, her exhaustion evident in the way her chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths. The weight of responsibility settled deeper, heavier, but it wasn't just the responsibility that I felt. It was something else, something I wasn't ready to name. "I didn't really have a choice," I muttered, but Mark wasn't buying it. "You always have a choice, dude. What's your plan? Keep them? Just let your whole life revolve around a bunch of strays?" The words hit harder than I expected, not because I disagreed, but because he wasn't entirely wrong. I had told myself this was temporary, just a problem to solve, but the moment I had let them inside, I had already crossed a line. Maybe I had crossed it the moment I set that plate of food on my porch. Mark exhaled sharply. "Look, I get it, man, but you know how this goes. First, you're just helping out, and then suddenly, they're yours. You better figure out what you're doing before it's too late." The call ended, but the words lingered. I wanted to believe I was still in control of this situation, that I could wake up tomorrow and take them to a shelter, let someone else figure it out. But as I sat there, watching Willow breathe, listening to the soft sounds of her kittens shifting in their sleep, I already knew the truth. This wasn't something I could walk away from. Not anymore. The sun had shifted in the sky by the time I finally moved from where I sat, its golden light spilling through the window and stretching long across the floorboards. Willow dozed lightly in the bin, her kittens pressed against her stomach, their tiny bodies rising and falling in rhythm with her breath. I should have been relieved that they were safe, that they had shelter and warmth, but Mark's words gnawed at the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. I told myself I was just helping out, that this wasn't permanent. But deep down, I already knew I was lying. There was no neat, easy way to separate myself from this. Not when Willow had chosen me, not when I had already started memorizing the way her kittens twitched in their sleep, the way her ears flicked when I stepped too close, as if she was always aware of me, even when her eyes were closed. A knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. Mrs. Callahan stood on the other side, holding a small bag of supplies in her arms, her sharp eyes scanning me the moment I let her in. Without a word, she set the bag down on the kitchen counter and began unpacking tiny bottles, powdered kitten formula, soft blankets that smelled faintly of her lavender-scented home. "You've got that look," she said, breaking the silence as she glanced toward the bin, like a man who just realized he's in way over his head. I huffed out a dry laugh, running a hand through my hair. "I think I passed that point hours ago." She nodded, unfazed. "That's how it starts. First, you worry about them surviving the night. Then, you start thinking about the next day. And before you know it, they aren't just strays anymore." She turned to me then, her voice softer. "You sure you're ready for that?" I wanted to tell her I wasn't, that I was still figuring this out, that this was just temporary. But the words wouldn't come, because the moment I had brought them inside, I had already made my choice. The house had fallen into a quiet rhythm. The kittens stirred now and then, stretching their impossibly small paws against Willow's belly before drifting back into sleep. The scent of fresh blankets and warm milk from the tiny bottles lingered in the air, mixing with the faint traces of the late afternoon breeze drifting through the open window. I had never paid much attention to the way sunlight pooled across my floorboards before, but now, as it stretched toward the bin where Willow lay, it felt like a spotlight, illuminating the undeniable truth. They weren't leaving. Not today. Maybe not ever. Mrs. Callahan stayed longer than I expected, guiding me through the first real steps of kitten care. How to keep them warm, how to mix the formula just right in case Willow couldn't nurse properly, how to handle them if I ever needed to step in. She spoke with the patience of someone who had seen this before, who knew what came next, even if I wasn't ready to admit it. But as the evening settled in and she prepared to leave, she studied me carefully, one hand resting on the doorknob. "You know, I've seen a lot of strays come and go in this town," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. "But I've never seen her stay anywhere for long, until now." I didn't say anything, I didn't need to. She nodded, as if that silence was all the answer she needed. "Well, I suppose we'll see what kind of man you are then." Then she was gone, her words hanging in the dimming light. I stood in the doorway long after her car disappeared down the road, staring at the quiet street beyond my porch. This wasn't just about the cats anymore. It was about me. The night settled in, wrapping the house in its heavy, muffled quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee cooling between my hands, the dim overhead light casting long shadows against the walls. The storage bin sat just a few feet away, lined with fresh towels. The kittens nestled deep within the folds, their tiny chests rising and falling in uneven little breaths. Willow was curled around them, her tail draped over their bodies like a final barrier between them and the outside world. I should have been exhausted. The day had unraveled faster than I could process, but my mind wouldn't quiet. Mark's words echoed in the back of my head, warning me about how these things happened, how I'd tell myself it was temporary until it wasn't. Mrs. Callahan's voice, calm but certain, cut through those thoughts, reminding me that this wasn't just about the cats. What kind of man was I? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling through my nose as I leaned back in the chair. I could still walk away. I could find a rescue, let someone else handle it, go back to my normal life. But the thought of packing them up, of seeing Willow's wary eyes as I carried her out the door, it twisted something deep in my chest. The softest mew broke the silence. One of the kittens stretched, its tiny body shifting, its paw pressing against the air like it was reaching for something unseen. My throat tightened. I rubbed a hand over my face. It was a stupid thought, reckless and impossible. But as I looked at them, so small, so mine, I knew. I wasn't going to let them go. Sleep never came. The house was quiet, but my mind felt restless, my thoughts tangled in a way that made the walls seem closer than they had ever been. I sat on the couch, my hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the storage bin just a few feet away. The soft glow of the kitchen light barely reached them, but I could still see the faint rise and fall of Willow's chest, the slow, steady rhythm of life that had somehow become my responsibility. It wasn't just about them anymore. It hadn't been for hours now. This was about something bigger, something I hadn't even been able to name until now. I had spent years keeping my life simple, avoiding complications, never letting anything too close. Work, home, sleep, repeat. And yet, in just 2 days, a stray cat had managed to crack something open in me, something I wasn't sure I could put back together even if I wanted to. Because now I wasn't just looking at a problem to solve, I was looking at a choice. And I wasn't sure what scared me more, the thought of keeping them or the thought of losing them. The weight of it pressed deep into my ribs, and for the first time in years, I felt uncertain about who I was. A soft rustling pulled me back to the present. Willow had lifted her head, her green eyes finding mine in the dim light. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but something passed between us in that moment. An understanding, a decision, and I already knew what it was. The moment stretched between us, silent but heavy. Willow's eyes stayed locked on mine, calm yet expectant, as if she already knew the answer before I did. The kittens stirred against her belly, their tiny paws twitching, their entire existence wrapped in the safety of her warmth. My chest tightened as I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, feeling the weight of this choice settle into something solid. I had told myself from the beginning that this was temporary, that I was just helping out until I could find a real solution. But I wasn't naive enough to believe that anymore. There was no version of this where I simply walked away. No moment where I packed them up, carried them outside, and left them with someone else. I had already made my choice before I ever realized it, woven into the way I had brought them in, the way I had stayed awake, listening to their tiny breaths. the way I had memorized the way Willow's ears flicked when I moved. Something in me cracked open, slow and quiet, but impossible to ignore. I reached out, hesitant but steady, letting my fingers brush against Willow's fur. She didn't flinch, didn't move away, just blinked lazily before resting her head back down against her kittens. The tension I had been carrying all day melted into something softer, something I wasn't sure I had ever felt before. I exhaled. "All right," I murmured, barely recognizing my own voice. "I guess you're staying." The words settled into the air, final and real. There was no turning back now. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that didn't scare me. The house felt different in the morning, not just because of the presence of Willow and her kittens, but because something inside me had shifted. The air no longer carried the quiet detachment I had grown used to. It felt fuller, warmer, as if the smallest sounds now had weight. The gentle rustling of tiny paws against the blankets, the soft hum of Willow's purring as she nursed, the way sunlight stretched long across the floor and illuminated them in its golden glow. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching them. They were still so small, so fragile, but they no longer looked out of place. This was their home now. And somehow, I had become a part of it. Mrs. Callahan had been right. It had started with a single moment, just feeding a hungry cat, just offering a place to rest. But life had a way of unfolding in ways you never expected, pushing you toward choices you didn't even realize you were making until it was too late to turn back. And maybe that was the point. Maybe we don't always choose the things that change us. Maybe sometimes they choose us. I let out a slow breath, setting my coffee down and stepping forward, crouching beside the bin. Willow lifted her head, blinking at me, then stretched, pressing her paw lightly against my arm before settling back down with a sigh. I wasn't just taking care of them. They were keeping me, too. Life has a way of surprising us, often in the most unexpected ways. Maybe you've had a moment like this, one small decision that led to something bigger than you ever imagined. Or maybe you found yourself in a situation where an animal, or even another person, ended up needing you more than you realized. If so, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe there's someone out there on the edge of a decision, unsure of what to do next. Sometimes, all it takes is a little nudge to realize the things we think we're saving might just be saving us in return. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes.